She dances with or without a fan. Hooray for Hollywood. Well, you're terrific if you're even.
Yes, indeed. Hooray for Hollywood. My name is Dan Saletti, and this is As the Reel Turns in the COVID nebula. We are still stuck at home. We are still bored as heck, but we're still going to deliver the best we can with some fun entertainment, movie things and stuff. So, we don't actually have any huge news this week. I once again, was not on top of it really, and there really hasn't been much going on. So we don't have an update for you necessarily today, so we're going to jump right into our subject today. And our subject is something that, personally, I will admit I have not seen a lot of. I have only seen bits and pieces, and only maybe one or two all the way through of this gentleman's work. But he has a lot of stuff out there, and there's a lot to talk about. So today we're going to be talking about all things connecting to the one Mr. Alfred Hitchcock. So yes, Alfred Hitchcock, he has done quite a bit in the movie industry. He is known as one of those masters of horror, but he's also done a whole bunch of other things, a little bit off the path of horror. And he's also inspired a lot of things, and in good ways and in the ways of parodies as well. And we have a bunch of great people to talk about it with. First of all, we have a guy who's, I think, been on the show the most amount of times. It's Mr. Dylan. Say hello, Dylan.
Ice cream.
Ice cream time. Below him, if I'm reading this Brady Bunch style, below him we have a guy who is in the spirit. He has his Alfred Hitchcock scene all set up behind him. It's John. Say hello, John.
Shout out to Grace Kelly. Hell yeah.
Oh yeah. And next to him, we have a guy who is always ready to talk about movies, and he's going to be switching pictures from his name to Fraser Crane to I don't know who else he's got a line up there. It's Christy. Say hello, Christy.
Oh, dear God.
Very good. Very good. And I'm sporting my Alfred Hitchcock behind me. I got his classic silhouette behind me. And Dylan's got the globe. I like that. He's got the globe. So guys, we're talking all things Alfred Hitchcock today, and of course he's a big movie guy, but before we get into the movies, he also dipped into the TV world, which is what that theme song you just heard was. That was the main theme song to his TV show, Alfred Hitchcock Presents. And this show was 50s, 60s type of show, and the theme song there, it's kind of a unique name, Funeral March for a Marionette. Of a marionette, for a marionette. It's a very, very creepy sounding theme, so it's very fitting for him. But Dylan, we'll go to you first. What do you? You're a movie guy. We're all movie guys here, but you've taken a bunch of classes and you're a movie maker yourself. What do you think of Alfred Hitchcock, and what do you know of his show, Alfred Hitchcock Presents?
I haven't really watched Alfred Hitchcock Presents. I do know about it. I heard it's pretty good. I do recognize that theme song. Why didn't he win an Academy Award? That's beyond me. That's a huge snub. His films are so influential. Sorry. Not the coronavirus. One more time, sorry. Anyway, though, like Psycho, Rear Window, Birds, Vertigo. He is the master of suspense. He's the one that started it all. He's influenced directors like De Palma, Shyamalan. Oh yeah. Pretty much, if you look in the dictionary next to like movie suspense genre, it's him.
Yeah,
you'll see his face.
I totally agree with that. And Christy, to you as well. Do you know anything about Alfred Hitchcock Presents, and what do you think of Hitchcock in general?
I haven't seen Hitchcock Presents. That's a movie but I've heard it's a very good anthology show. Predated the Twilight Zone too, even though it was much different than the Twilight Zone. But anyway, though, what was I going to say? Right, Hitchcock he's friggin' amazing. Like, I love all his work. You know, Psycho, Psycho, The Birds, Vertigo. Well, Vertigo wasn't the best, but I still liked it.
Rope.
Rear Window's another good one. And I also like some of his lesser-known films, like Dial M for Murder, Rope, and then Lifeboat is an interesting one if anybody wants to watch that. He's just made a bunch of amazing films that I'd recommend to almost anyone.
Right. And John, lastly, same question to you. What do you know of Hitchcock Presents and then Hitchcock himself?
Hitchcock Presents, I'm not overly knowledgeable on, to say the least. The thing with Hitchcock for me was a week ago I had never seen a Hitchcock movie, and so I've basically been spending the last 7 days watching as many as I can to get prepared for this. So
That's
I'm kind of
studying. I like that.
So I'm trying very, very hard not to come across as unknowledgeable. I mean, obviously I know him as a filmmaking legend, but I had never been overly impressed with what I had seen in clips and stuff like that. And overall, I mean, I think, he's important clearly as a director, because he basically did for directing what James Dean did for acting, which was made it not, what's the word? He never feels static. He feels like he's really trying to do something as opposed to just make a commercial product. And, he suffered for that certainly at the Oscars, but as far as history goes, he's certainly, I think most of his movies have become huge things. Obviously depends which one, some of them more so than others. Presents, on the other hand, it's interesting because that was very much really set up the, what's the word? The ability of television to be more of a individualized thing, if that makes sense. Like, it became more, because it was the first like huge anthology thing. It set the bar for later on Twilight Zone, which would, I think, eventually refine the formula. Because the issue with Hitchcock Presents was that it was always, there's upwards of 200 writers across, nearly 300 episodes. So it didn't have the same through line of consistency as like Twilight Zone did, with Serling writing pretty much all of them. So Presents is important, as is Hitchcock.
Right. I mean, you're all absolutely right. I mean, this does predate stuff like Twilight Zone and Outer Limits and all that, slightly creepy stuff to come. Like I said, this was 50s, 60s around then that this show was around. And once again, I will play our good friend Casey, who I've recently heard who hopes to join us at least for the last couple shows, or one of them at least at some point. Alfred Hitchcock Presents was referenced in a recent Wonder Years episode I just watched. So there you go. There's the connection for today. But that just shows that that you can have, and that show was set in late 60s, early 70s. So that shows the impact and how relevant that show still was back then even. So again, that was his TV endeavor, but of course Hitchcock is more famous for his films. And there's no other way to start off a conversation talking about Hitchcock movies than with his probably one of, if not his most famous work when you think of Alfred Hitchcock, that being, of course, Psycho. So yes, Psycho. It is, like I said, one of, if not the most famous Hitchcock endeavor ever. It is a first in so many ways in movie making. And if you're the one person out there who has not seen Psycho, I was part of that club for a while until I actually did see it all the way through.
No, you were forced to.
Yeah, well, true. It's something.
Well, for class.
But I enjoyed it. And generally, and I will agree. I jumped at that movie. At points I even jumped. If you are that one person who has not seen it, it's basically one of those first horror movies that does give you a little bit of a scare. It's basically about a woman who is basically forced, because she broke down, to stay at a motel run by this guy who has this weird connection with his mother, who stays in this other house. And the woman starts to, see something isn't quite right here. Then she gets murdered by the mother, supposedly. But then investigations start to come around, and we find out that the mother is actually dead, and the guy who runs this motel is just nuts. He's psycho. So, John, we'll go to you first. Is Psycho is it as famous as people make it out to be, and is it as well known as people meant to be, or is it maybe just like, oh, that's an old scary movie, can I skip it?
In terms of fame, I mean, I basically knew the entire plot of Psycho before I had ever seen a Hitchcock movie. So that's not exactly a mark for obscurity. So it's in terms of whether that's a big deal or not. I mean, Psycho is, as far as, big enough to get remade, big enough to be any myriad of things, but in terms of whether it's still the movie, I mean, I feel like it leans a lot on the, being a send-up of like schlocky horror films, which is weird because there weren't that many horror films at that point, but it sort of was trying to be the, dime store novel, it wasn't trying to be the same suspense stuff that Hitchcock later did with, the other movies. It was very much it feels a lot more comic-y, like not in terms of comedy or anything, because it's not a funny movie, but like in terms of, it feels like you're watching, I don't know, like the parts of a Batman comic before Batman shows up. It feels very not schlocky, but just stylized, very hyper stylized. Whereas his other films don't sort of do that,
right?
Which may be a benefit to some people, but compared to his other work, it doesn't. I think his other films should have a higher place in that pantheon.
Okay. And Dylan, I mean, you are definitely one of those rising masters in horror. Do you see this as one of those milestone horror films, or do you think it's one of Hitchcock's skippable ones? Like everybody knows it.
Absolutely, I think this is a milestone in horror. It is considered one of the first slashers. Heavily debated, but we'll get into that. But when you look at it through a historical perspective, you got to think about why. Like, one, it has two major twists. Spoiler alert, and I think everyone knows it. Janet Leigh, she dies, but at the time, the lead actress never died. Like, in the middle of the movie. Also, obviously, Norman Bates is, his mother's dead. He has a split personality, so that was the other twist. But remember, you didn't like that wasn't, people were shocked to see that. Also, a first case of a flushing toilet in a movie. And also, it started off as like, oh, it's just a mystery, and like, girl steals money from her boss, and then that's the other twist. It turns into a whole different genre. Right. And when you think about it, though, like, and continuing on, like, it's inspired why did they ever do it, but a remake, multiple sequels. It's also based on a novel. Mm-hmm. A failed TV pilot called Bates Motel, and then a successful TV series called Bates Motel. So I'm definitely going to say it's probably the most, or at least one of the most influential movies and Hitchcock movies in his filmography. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and it definitely left a legacy.
One little thing, and Daniel, you'll love this. Psych, the Hitchcock, when he sees Lassie as Norman Bates.
That's right. Yeah.
I just had to bring that up.
That's the other thing. And Christy, I'll ask this to you. Because Psycho is so big, and because it was such a success for Hitchcock, it's been parodied multiple times.
Bugs Bunny.
Yeah, from like the Psych episode to Looney Tunes Back in Action with Bugs Bunny recreating the famous shower scene. Do you think that maybe it's a little too parodied too much?
No, I mean any influential film is going to get parodied no matter what, in my opinion. And I'll be honest, I'll come out and say, and speaking of its influentialness, I'll be honest, I totally love Psycho, and as you've asked before, it's not skippable at all. But I will say, yeah, to answer your question, I mean, all influential films are going to get parodied. And one little quick Christie Rants thing is,
Sure.
Why did they remake it? Why? I mean, I know it's money, but you don't screw with that kind of thing, And some people would ask, including one of our friends, like, what's so bad about a shot-for-shot remake? Well,
there's nothing new.
You know everything, and you're casting Vince Vaughn as Norman Bates. Like, what are you thinking? And also, just last thing with Psycho is it's kind of funny because unless you read the book, nobody knew the twists coming. And in fact, everybody sees Norman Bates as Anthony Perkins, when in the original book, he's a fat, ugly, middle-aged alcoholic.
Drunk. Yeah,
he's an alcoholic, and he didn't have a split personality. He would get so drunk he'd black out, and that's what would happen.
Oh.
The reason why they cast Anthony Perkins is because, he was the boy next door. Like, oh, pretty boy like that, he can't be a murderer. And that's another twist.
Hey, yeah.
When I gotta say, I forgot to mention that Psycho probably ranks as one of the best twists of all time. I mean, everybody knows it now. Like, Darth Vader is Luke's father, but like, it ranks up there. Because once again, looking at it through a historical perspective.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, sorry, one more thing. I also, for the time, the movie was also pretty progressive, because if you recall the scene in the police station where the cops say, oh, Norman Bates, he's a transvestite, and the psychologist says, no, he's just sick. He's not a transvestite. It's not a disorder. So, I mean, it's in the 60s, so obviously people weren't as open-minded back then. But when you think about it, that line is aged pretty well.
Yeah.
And the whole movie is timeless anyway. So, like,
yeah, absolutely. And so, I say we jump around to different Hitchcock movies here, and the next one here, a lot of Hitchcock movies are just one word, and that's kind of what draws people in. What the mystery of this one word is, and this other one-word one starts off what I'm going to call, actually pertaining to John's background, the Jimmy Stewart trilogy of Hitchcock films. And the first one we're going to start off with is one called Rope. So yes, Rope.
I love Rope.
Okay, yeah, then Christy, we'll go to you first, because this one I'm not too familiar with, except for the fact that it does have a very famous actor and favorite actor of mine, Jimmy Stewart. Tell us about Rope, Christy.
Oh, Rope's an excellent movie, and it's actually loosely based on an actual event. It's a terrific film that's made to look like it's a one-shot film. It takes place entirely in an apartment where two college students, have killed one of their friends with a rope because they think he's quote-unquote inferior. The two guys are insane. One of them is reluctant, but the other one's a total psychopath. And they stuff him in a trunk, and then they proceed to invite all of the deceased man who they killed. They invite his friends, his family, and his fiance over to their apartment, where the trunk that they stuffed his body in is going to be the table for the dinner. And it's just totally, and they also invite over one of their professors, Jimmy Stewart, who taught them the inferiority thing. And as time goes on, and the one take thing, they do have cuts, but they're very carefully masked. And Jimmy Stewart starts getting pretty suspicious because he sees one of them is overly nervous, and everything just looks very, artificial. It doesn't look like it. Like it looks like something's real. They're up to no good, and it's just a really interesting concept. And it's inspired by the Leopold and Loeb case, if you guys have heard of that. But it's a terrific
murder.
movie. Terrific movie. Perfect Murder. That's the whole plot. It's a great movie, and I love it.
Okay. Yeah, that. See, I initially thought I knew a little bit about it. I knew that there was a murder involved, and it did have to do with the rope and stuff like that. Except I initially thought that it had something to do with like a hanging or something like that, because it had a rope involved. And John, we'll go to you with this. Do you think that some could maybe get confused about the title? Like they would think something along the lines that I did, or would they go directly to Christie's description of it?
Well,
I don't think they go directly to Christie's. I think that, they could get confused. Obviously, it's not like, that matter is resolved relatively quickly. So it's not like, you're watching it and you're like, oh, hey, nobody's going to get indignant about, what type of murder it was. Like, there's nobody standing there in the theater saying, well, I paid for a hanging movie, not a strangling movie. That's not how it's going to happen. But so, no, I don't necessarily think that it's too much of a difference that it's going to, screw with people's heads or anything.
And it was with a rope too. So
yeah, it is. They strangle them to death with a rope.
Right.
That's just people misunderstanding the title.
Yeah.
That's not necessarily Hitchcock's fault.
That's just my ridiculous ideas of what Hitchcock is doing. It's relatively. It sounds like a simple murder investigation type of a movie. And Dylan, unless you were Alfred Hitchcock going to the producers and saying that, if you went up to somebody and say, "Hey, here's a murder investigation movie about a murder with a rope," would that sound like an Alfred Hitchcock threatening type of a movie to you?
Well, it's definitely a suspense movie. It's a murder. I mean, you could turn that into a crime thriller. Also, I've only seen clips of the movie. What I've seen, I've liked, and I do want to see it. Especially the continuous take, how it's cut together. But the thing about Hitchcock, which makes him so powerful, is he was a director at a time where studios were in control. And he made so many successful movies, Psycho, Birds, Rear Window, Rope, that he had the power to do what he wanted. So, I mean, if he said, "Hey, I want to make this movie," he's making this movie.
Yeah.
He could say, I'm making these ridiculous cartoons of nothing, of a white space, blank space. It would happen because he had that power.
Exactly.
So, he didn't need a producer to tell him no.
Right.
He had people write his scripts for him. Like he couldn't write, so he just said, "Hey, this is what I want. You're gonna write it."
Yeah, and the other thing that it's Jimmy Stewart, so obviously he's going to put in a good performance, and I like how he did these three films because it branched out of what you would associate sometimes with Jimmy Stewart. Some lighthearted stuff. I mean, of course, It's a Wonderful Life, and then my connection with him, Harvey. There are those are more lighthearted, but with these, they're more dramatic and basically threatening because they're Alfred Hitchcock. The second in this trilogy, I say that in quotes because they're not connected, but they just all star Jimmy Stewart, is John's background, and one that I have seen. I actually enjoy this movie a lot. It is, of course, the famous Rear Window. So yes, Rear Window. This is one of those other big Hitchcock movies that a lot of people associate with him. It is once again Jimmy Stewart and not princess yet, but to be Grace Kelly. And there is a whole bunch of stuff going on in this movie, from everything from the fact that we have Jimmy Stewart, who is in a wheelchair, to there is a whole bunch of stuff he's seeing in his apartment window, to there's a murder involved, of course, to, for some reason, Perry Mason being in this movie. So there's a whole bunch of stuff thrown into this movie. Dylan, we'll go to you first. The idea of just basically, I mean, the movie isn't entirely seen this way, but the idea of a movie just being seen through the eyes of binoculars. Jimmy Stewart. What do you think of that?
Oh, it's great. It's it's nothing new today, but once again, a historical perspective. It was a new kind of filmmaking. You never really got that first-person perspective. There's action in the movie, but when you think about it, the movie takes place in at one set, just the apartment complex. Mm. And also another thing that Hitchcock's power is, there's the production code. You could only do certain things. I mean, no, in Rear Window, he's pushing back against the production code. He shows, the woman who dances in her underwear.
Right.
He's making references to suicide. There's references to sex with that young couple. There's this Rear Window is, to me, is and it's a great mystery too, but he's pushing the boundaries and he's trying new things, and that's what I really like about Hitchcock.
Yeah.
And this is a classic movie, and it's probably one of the symbols of the mystery genre.
Yeah, I totally agree. And John, we'll go to you since you have the background there.
And very influential. I mean, once again, Disturbia, a remake. Psych. Yeah.
Since you had the background there, John, why do you love this movie so much? I mean, you mentioned Jimmy Stewart, you mentioned Grace Kelly there. What draws you to this?
I mean, lots of things draw me to it. I mean, that's the entire point of the movie. I think it's easily Hitchcock's best. I mean, obviously, number one, at least in my book, Grace Kelly, her best performance probably ever. Her anniversary yesterday.
Oh.
But yeah, it was. Rear Window is interesting because it's number one. It's, I think, as set design, above all else, I think the biggest character in the movie is the square. All these apartment buildings. It is itself this big organic being that helps with the storytelling and is just as vivid and well characterized as the characters themselves. I think that's its greatest strength. Obviously, apart, Jimmy Stewart in a very rare, brooding almost performance that feels it's really the first of his really not normal roles, because I mean he had somewhat not normal roles. Again, Rope first among them, but this was the first one where you actively, he was making irrational choices. He was making weird. He was being awful to his friends and his fiance. He was just not being upstanding man about town Jimmy Stewart, and I think that was his as a role for him as a part of his greater filmography. That's a huge deal. Grace Kelly again being such a huge, easily her best performance. It's so multivaried and so forward thinking for a movie of its time, to have a woman that's that driven and that self-assured was a huge deal. She's the one that's going out and doing all the action stuff. Jimmy Stewart's staying behind, laid up in bed. Jimmy Stewart gets one scene of him actually doing anything, and don't get me wrong, that scene near the end, the final confrontation, amazing. Oh, yeah. Such a creative use, not just of scene blocking, but also of lighting, of camera, the lens flare aspect. Such a great way of signifying that in a way that if it was done now, I don't think it would have the same effect, because it's such a different filmmaking style. It could only be made then. And I think that's Rear Window's biggest strength, is that it's so well suited to the 50s style of filmmaking that I think if it were made now by a different director, I mean, even if Hitchcock made it now with everything that's changed in filmmaking since then, I don't even think that he could have done it as well as he did it back in the 50s, because it's like the apotheosis of everything in that style.
Mm-hmm.
And to the point where, it just sort of changed everything, but because everybody said, well, he perfected it, let's just sort of pack up and change filmmaking.
Right. And Christy, you do have a lot of names in here, like Jimmy Stewart and Grace Kelly, but then you also have Perry Mason, Raymond Burr, like I mentioned, and as much as he's associated with that TV character Perry Mason, do you think he's more famous in being just this silent role in a Hitchcock movie? And do you think that this movie has an impact on films?
Oh, this definitely has an impact on films. And, Raymond Burr, I mean, I never even heard of him but prior to. I mean, I think I had heard the name, but I'd never even heard of Perry Mason. Well, I did hear of Perry Mason, but I didn't know he was the titular character.
Yeah.
And, he's just, it's a great movie. And, not to rant here, but, it was remade, but unlike Psycho, they did go a different route, which I can appreciate, but still don't fix what's not broken.
True, and I was actually going to bring that up because it was remade as a TV movie.
Same year as the remake of Psycho.
Oh, really? Okay. But it was remade like you said, in a unique way, because it had the Man of Steel as the titular character. It had Christopher Reeve as Jimmy Stewart's role, and the way that makes it unique is because this was after his horse accident. He was already paralyzed by this time. So he was already in a wheelchair, which kind of makes it interesting in a way. So it was a different path, but you're absolutely right. Why fix something that's not broken? And Rear Window is certainly an example that if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And I really do agree that it is one of Jimmy Stewart's and Hitchcock's best roles ever made. So what I'm going to do is we're going to take a quick break real quick, and then after we come back, we're going to finish the Jimmy Stewart trilogy and then move on to some other Hitchcock favorites. And to play us out, I mean, I didn't play it when we were talking about it, so it only seems right that we play one of Hitchcock's most famous musical cues to play us out, that being the famous shower music from Psycho. This is As the Reel Turns. We'll be right back. Here's the Psycho shower music.
Hey, Ranger, why do you have to remind people to be careful with fire?
Well, Mr. Mountain Lion, sometimes people need to be reminded about certain things, like not to run with scissors or let children play with wild dingoes, and to be responsible for fires they start.
So what you're saying is that people can be careless and forgetful?
Pretty much.
That makes me very sad.
Sounds like someone needs a hug.
Back off or I'll turn your hat into confetti!
Remember, only you can prevent wildfires. A public service message from Smokey Bear, the U.S. Forest Service, your state forester, and the Ad Council.
Welcome back to As the Reel Turns. My name is Dan Saletti, and we are talking about all things Alfred Hitchcock today. Before the break, we talked about Hitchcock's big hit of Psycho, and then we started off our Jimmy Stewart trilogy. We started off with Rope, then we moved on to Rear Window, and now we're going to finish the trilogy off with that song you just heard, that being Vertigo. Now, Vertigo is basically, if I remember correctly, is about heights. And Christy, you have something to say about this film. We'll start with you.
Well, I like to tell some people this, but I'll be honest, I think this is, people consider this one of the greatest, not even one of the greatest Hitchcock films of all time, one of the greatest films of all time. and I hate to say it, but
It's not.
I think. Thank you, Dylan. I think that I think this is kind of an overrated Hitchcock film. I appreciate what they did for the time. There's lots of revolutionary techniques that they used, but this is not Hitchcock's best movie. Not even close.
Well, Dylan, you were kind of shaking your head at me. What is this movie exactly about, and why is it bad?
Well, not at you, Daniel. It's just that, in my opinion, the plot is so confusing.
Is it about?
It's about a detective named Scotty. He's afraid of heights, and his partner got killed because he wasn't able to save him because he was too scared of heights, and because they were chasing a suspect. And then he falls. From what I've seen, like he gets involved with this mysterious woman, and then she dies, and then it's all like a murder. Like, it's a murder plot, but it's so like confusing, and there's that trippy dream sequence he has that really threw me off. Mm-hmm. It's a little too long and too slow for me. And the thing is, as Christy said, yeah, there are a lot of good techniques, like when he's looking down, that Hitchcock zoom, as they call it, and the characters and all that. But it's just, good techniques don't automatically make a good film, and it's just, I think the movie is just overrated, in my opinion.
Definitely.
And as I was saying, if I were to choose this movie or Psycho, I'd choose Psycho in a heartbeat, because it's just, it's overrated. I don't know why people like it. It's not a bad movie, but it is not the best movie of all time, and it is definitely not one of Hitchcock's best. I'll say that.
Yeah, it's a movie in here. It's like the movie's essentially a huge conspiracy theory.
But it's hard to even get there.
Yeah, it is.
Now, John, people have some of the guys here just said it's not that good, and it's overpraised and stuff like that. But it's been parodied like Psycho. In fact, it's been parodied onto the big screen in one of Mel Brooks's films called High Anxiety, and I've seen that, and that's clearly, I won't say ripping off, but clearly parodying Vertigo. Do you think that even one of Hitchcock's not best films deserves a parody like one done by the great parodier himself, Mel Brooks?
I mean, number one, I will voice my agreement with the other members of this panel. Vertigo, bad movie, very bad movie, not a good movie at all, not even overrated, just bad, not good. Would be a great David Lynch movie, but other than that, not good. But as far as parodies go, Mel Brooks, number one, the second best parody of this film. The first one, of course, being Brian De Palma's Obsession, which is literally just a rip-off of this movie that De Palma was just like, nope, just going to steal this idea. Brian De Palma, of course, a hack. I hate him, but like even he made a better movie than this movie, and it was the same movie. But yeah, Mel Brooks, probably a waste of time. I haven't seen High Anxiety, so I'm not the best judge of that. But as far as whether this movie deserves to be in the pantheon of things that are deserving of parody, I mean, maybe parody in terms of mocking it because it's so bad, but other than that, not, it's different from mocking like Rear Window or parodying Psycho, because those are movies that have contributed something to the world, whereas this one, not so much.
Right. Well, I mean, if you know about Vertigo, I recommend High Anxiety because it did make me laugh, and it is Mel Brooks, so it's destined to be funny and a good laugh of a movie.
And also about High Anxiety, something nice that Alfred Hitchcock did. Mel Brooks was worried that he offended Hitchcock, and Hitchcock sent him a note saying, "Hey, no need to have anxiety about High Anxiety." I love that.
I think I did read something about that. That's true. I like that.
Or something like that. Yeah. Hitchcock liked it.
It shows that Hitchcock, liked it and is a nice guy about it. So the next Hitchcock film I want to talk about.
For you, John, he didn't really like De Palma's movie, so
yeah, good.
That's
as he shouldn't have.
But still, though, Vertigo just, I don't get the hype. It's, yeah, no.
I mean, I'm not a huge fan of heights at some points, but I mean, I'm not like extremely afraid of them or anything like that.
No, I'm saying the movie Vertigo. Like,
Yeah, no, I get
that.
that.
I don't.
Yeah, I'm going to be honest. I agree with most of you. John, I disagree with you a little bit. In my opinion, it's far from a bad movie, but it is far from a great movie.
It's a good idea. That's the issue. When I said that this would make a great Lynch movie, I mean, I agree with that wholeheartedly, but like, it's so... the issue is that it's so poorly paced. That's the main thing.
What made it good at the time was all the new techniques, but as I said,
yes,
techniques don't automatically make a movie good.
I think it helped that it was made at a time when most movies were just sort of... They all looked the same, you know? Whereas Hitchcock, number one, Hitchcock was riding high on all the other classics that he had made. So I assume people just sort of weren't willing to accept that he had made kind of a bad movie. So he's it's so weird. It's not even confusing. Like, it's an understandable plot, but like, you know, all the like the action is in weird places, you know, stuff is revealed way too early, way too late, you know. It's
confusing.
The actual plot, but the issue is that the actual interesting conflict of the movie, which is Jimmy Stewart falling in love with a woman who looks like his whatever dead girlfriend or something like that, that's a great concept. That could have been done really well, but it happens 2/3 of the way through the movie. That's and the rest of it is just like some subpar detective drama.
It doesn't feel like a mystery. It feels more like a cheesy romance.
Yeah, and also, like, there are characters that totally totally disappear at one point in the movie. Like, towards the end, like, there's a bunch of important characters that just go poof. You never hear from them again.
Hey, Daniel, this is As the Real Rants.
Apparently so. I mean,
we don't like this movie. It's not.
No.
Yeah, no, we don't like it.
Why'd you make us talk about this movie, Daniel? Come on.
I'm sorry. It's part of the trilogy.
Hey, wait a minute. Daniel always says he's a therapist, which is venting to him.
True.
Daniel, to be fair, it was a good idea to include this because it's definitely one of his most notable films, but it's not even close to his best.
Yeah, I mean, and like I said, it's part of that trilogy, and I got to give it at least like 5 bonus points just for having Jimmy Stewart because I like Jimmy Stewart. But let's move on from this movie, and let's move on to another notable one that actually inspired a whole bunch of movies just by one scene, pretty much, because it's just the one scene that people always associate with the other bunch of movies that it inspired. This is North by Northwest. So yes, North by Northwest, it's a Cary Grant, Alfred Hitchcock movie, and the reason I say that it inspires a whole bunch of other movies just by one scene is because there's a famous scene in this film where Cary Grant is running away from a biplane that is really going to run him over pretty soon, and this scene was recreated just by one little difference, and that being swapping the plane out for a helicopter in From Russia with Love. Yes, this is the film that pretty much inspired the James Bond films. Discuss. Dylan, we'll go to you first.
I actually haven't seen this movie, but I know the biplane scene. Everybody knows the biplane scene. You know, if it's one thing about Hitchcock, people might not know the movie, but they know the scene.
Right.
Going back to, you know, all the parodies, the homages, the rip-offs. So yeah, I haven't seen this movie. I've always wanted to.
Yeah.
The Fugitive movie, and I always like those movies, those on the run movies. But yeah, no, I haven't seen it, so I can't. I can't really judge.
Northwest. John, North by Northwest. Yeah, you.
Yeah, Cary Grant should have been James Bond. I don't understand why this movie exists. Like, it's a perfectly fine movie, but like, I don't see why. Like, I get it that like it exists to inspire James Bond, but I don't think that it makes sense to do that unless you make Cary Grant James Bond. And Cary Grant hasn't been James Bond, and he never.
Cary Grant turned down the role.
Dead. Huh?
Cary Grant turned down the role of James Bond for Dr. No because he thought that he was too old. He thought that he was too old because he was 50. He was 58 and he only wanted to do one movie.
Who cares? That's dumb.
Yeah, I was gonna say I thought he was in the running. Christy, how about you? North by Northwest.
I unfortunately have not seen it, but I should watch it because it's definitely. I have seen like clips because there's one like scene where there's a notable extra in the movie before there's a big explosion in a scene. You can clearly see a little boy extra, and he's covering his ears before it even happens. So it's like you just spoiled the whole surprise, kid, and that's just funny. And I also noticed that if you look on the front cover where Cary Grant's running away from the plane in front of Mount Rushmore, you can clearly see one of the heads as Alfred Hitchcock on the front poster.
Are you serious?
Hitchcock appeared in all of his films, or almost all of his films.
Not all, yeah, almost all. And in the scenes, in the ones he didn't, a lot of times there was a picture of him in some of them. Like in Lifeboat, there's a picture of him in a newspaper.
I was actually going to bring that up later, but that definitely is a key point in Hitchcock's career that he did make all these cameos. And, he was doing it way before Stan Lee was doing it in Marvel movies. So you can call almost Alfred Hitchcock the original Stan Lee, sort of.
Alfred Hitchcock was the actor who appeared in the most Alfred Hitchcock movies.
That's true. That's very true.
And actually, he started putting it at the beginning because people were just going to his movies just to see him.
Well, that's the only reason I watch Marvel movies, just to see Stan Lee.
Well, a little piece of trivia there that and he was like, no, you should be watching it for the movie, so he just put himself at the beginning all the time.
True.
Mm-hmm.
Next one I want to talk about is one that Christy brought up, said that he liked. I suppose you can still do this. I mean, with an old-fashioned phone of mine, I have to go through a couple clicks on the keypad, but you still can dial M for murder. So, Christy, we'll go to you first on this, since you brought it up at the beginning. Why do you love Dial M for Murder, and remind us what it is about?
Well, I'll be honest. Dial M for Murder, it's not my favorite one, but it's definitely better than Vertigo. It's pretty quick-paced. It's pretty quick, and it's essentially a run-of-the-mill, kind of a mystery. It's not really a mystery film. It's essentially an ex-tennis player who's married to Grace Kelly. His wife, he finds out, is cheating on him, and so he conspires with he blackmails a former classmate who actually is in Dr. No. He plays the professor and he was also the first Blofeld as well. You never saw him. But anyway, though, he conspires with that guy to kill his wife, and the classmate's gonna hide in the apartment while the husband is out, and this is what he ends up doing. The guy who is going to kill her, he tries, but he ends up failing, and the husband, who's the ex-tennis player, he improvises a very, very creative and ingenious plan B, which is essentially to make it look like she murdered the guy, so she gets executed. That's kind of the whole plan, but things don't always go as planned.
Okay, that seems very, very Hitchcocky.
Yes.
For sure. John, Grace Kelly.
Grace Kelly.
Does that mean it's a good movie? And do you have a thing for Grace Kelly?
I just like Grace Kelly. She's pretty great. She's also dead, unfortunately. But so if I had a thing, not so much anymore. But yeah. I mean, Dial M for Murder is, number one, the name, total ripoff of Fritz Lang's M. So, I guess, screw Fritz Lang.
I never noticed that, but you are true.
Believe me, yeah. I mean, and that's the other thing, because Hitchcock was such a Fritz Lang, sorry. It's just so, and to the point where, like, everybody I've ever met who I talked to about M is I showed them the poster, and it's like, is that Dial M for Murder? And because that's the other issue is that the poster for M and one of the posters for Dial M for Murder, they're so similar that like it's so weird. But yeah, Grace Kelly, very good. Love Grace Kelly. Everybody else kind of irrelevant, but like, so I haven't seen the entirety of it. That's the other thing. I've only seen like bits and pieces, but from what I've seen, I mean, Grace Kelly's the high point, but that's most movies. So
There you go.
I guess watch it.
Dylan, Dial M for Murder. Your thoughts?
I haven't seen this. It's also on my list, but sounds very good. I will check it out.
Oh, also, one of the it's one of the multiple movies in which Hitchcock made a movie where the main character is a tennis player.
Huh.
The other one was
Yeah.
Strangers on a Train.
Yeah,
Maybe he likes tennis. I don't know.
yeah, maybe.
He also likes blonde females.
Yeah. So we
He liked Tippi Hedren a little too much.
A little bit.
so we talked in detail a lot about a lot of Hitchcock films. We mentioned a few other ones, like Christy, you just mentioned Strangers on a Train. We went into much detail of our favorite film, Vertigo,
Man
and
Who Knew Too Much.
Man Who Knew Too Much.
Also a Jimmy Stewart.
Oh,
They
really?
made two of them.
Quadrilogy. My bad. Quadrilogy.
They made two of them.
And Christy even brought up that there were more Bond connections that I thought, with this guy being the first Blofeld. Glad to see it wasn't Donald Pleasance, Telly Savalas, or Charles Gray.
No.
So the last film I want to talk about today is one that probably is just as famous as Psycho, but it's famous for being not bad, but just almost flat out ridiculous. And when I say ridiculous and you connect it with Alfred Hitchcock, you probably know where I'm going with this. It is, of course, The Birds. Now, I quickly want to say that as ridiculous as this is, that's not to say that this actually can be creepy, because we talked about with Vertigo, it's something that probably on paper it sounds really cool and really scary, like birds taking over the world pretty much. That sounds pretty frightening to me. But when put on screen, yeah.
Remember
Still a classic.
remember what I told you. Hitchcock had the power. He could do what he wanted.
It's true. John,
I want to show birds attacking people. He's showing birds attacking people.
True. John, we'll go to you first on this one. Is Birds as ridiculous as I make it out to be, or is it really, one of his horror classics?
I wouldn't call it a horror classic. I'd call it a
Ridiculous.
Classic.
I wouldn't necessarily call it a classic, because it's the extent to which it actually holds up is debatable, like as a film, but as I think as a story, it's very interesting. There's a very good book, which is a scene-by-scene deconstruction of it by Camille Paglia, and it's interesting, like the idea of Tippi Hedren as being this sort of stand-in for all of the women in Hitchcock films, like sort of, and the birds sort of being him. Like, again, very esoteric, very weird, but like, I think as a idea, it's interesting. I mean, it certainly has something behind it. I mean, it wasn't like some schlocky, middle of the night horror film that was just on that was made just to be made, as opposed to like actually say something. But to the extent that you can expect a movie about sentient birds to say something, but it's interesting. It's not my favorite. It's middle of the road, but it's certainly, what's the word? It's certainly enough, and I think it's got an undercurrent to it that's very not surface level. There's birds attacking people stuff. So, obviously you can criticize the acting, you can criticize the direction, but other than that, as a story, yeah, maybe. I mean, it's no Birdemic Shock and Terror, but I think it's a good good enough, you know.
It inspired speaking of Birdemic, it did inspire a very good, so bad it's good movie.
And Christy, we'll stick with you on this. What is that movie, and what are your thoughts on Birds?
Well, Birds, obviously, nowadays, it's definitely a very cliche, it's very cliche, very, cheesy concept, but still, though, I mean, it really wasn't done that often before in the 60s. Well, they did have a bunch of sci-fi movies back then, but, I mean, it was it was cool for the time, and they found out that Hitchcock was not making up what the birds were doing. There's actually a disease that causes birds to go mad. So, and I'll be honest, the Birds is just, it's enjoyable and, it's interesting and it's fun and it's got a bunch of actors who are pretty high class. They're not these low grade actors. They're actually pretty good.
Yeah, you got Suzanne Plachette before she was on Bob Newhart show, one of my favorite shows. Dylan, this movie does get criticized sometimes because of, sometimes the effects, sometimes the story. But is it still one of Hitchcock's best?
Oh yeah. It's not the best film, but it's not the. It's obviously, as we all said, some of the special effects haven't held up well. Once again, for the time, though, that was scary. That was, it was scary to think, oh, these cute, innocent little birds are attacking us. I mean, come on. When you go outside, you see a big flock of birds. Who doesn't think of Alfred Hitchcock?
Yeah.
And inspired a wonderful 2 movies, the Birdemic movies. A great Arthur episode called The Squirrels. You probably know that.
Right. That's right. I remember.
And they even reference the birds. They're like, hey, I just watched The Squirrels, and The Birds is on tonight. Want to watch that? They even reference that. But yeah, no, it's... to me, it's like one of those Nature Strikes Back movies, and I think it started it all. Like, come on, you have killer bees, killer rats, killer ants, Attack of the Killer Tomatoes. Come on. But like, yeah, no. To me, I'm not guilty pleasure, not best movie, but it's a good movie. It's a staple in Hitchcock's filmography. It's one of his classics, and you know what? You just gotta appreciate it for what it is. It's not $200 million. It's not Godzilla. It's not Star Wars. It's just birds attack people, start screaming.
Yeah.
And nobody quit the Marines in it, right, Christy?
No, nobody did. No one quit, but they just got tired of all the killing.
Some people did get hurt during it, right?
No, it's a joke. It's from Birdemic.
Oh, sorry. Well, guys...
But you know what I mean. Look how influential it is.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, guys, we've talked about a lot of Alfred Hitchcock stuff today. Like I said, we went deep into our now favorite film, Vertigo. We mentioned a few. We talked about some famous ones. I will say this. If you ever want to see what it could have been like to actually be inside of a movie, like for you to experience Hitchcock classic, go check out the Defunct Land episode of History of Alfred Hitchcock, The Art of Making Movies. This was a Universal Studios attraction where it basically put you in the famous scenes of these Hitchcock films. And Defunct Land is like a documentary series on YouTube that went into detail about it. So definitely check out that episode, The Art of Making Movies, on the Defunct Land YouTube channel. So guys, I think we have just about enough time to do this before we sign off for today. So yes, it's time for Who Are You, where I play a clip from a film or TV show, and they have to tell me who it is and or what it is from. I'm actually going to throw a bit of a challenge at you because the guy I'm going to play for you is more famous for doing other voices. So we're going to just see how you do with his regular voice from a show that he's doing currently right now. So guys, here's your clip for today. Best of luck.
We have this running bit that we do where we put each other's names in the shuttle log when we didn't actually take a shuttle out. And then when the other one finds out, it's just like, oh my God, embarrassing. I didn't take that shuttle. Ah!
So, that is your clip. Christy, we'll start with you first. Who is that, and or what is it from?
I'll have to say Seth MacFarlane from the Orville. If not, it's a man from a show.
Okay. Dylan, we'll go to you next.
I'll say Seth MacFarlane.
Seth
Why
MacFarlane?
not? Voice actor. Probably not.
And John, how about you? Who is that, and what is it from? And or what is it from?
I want to say H. John Benjamin, but in something that's I don't know what it's from, but it sounds to me like H. John Benjamin.
All right, so the tallies are in, and Dylan and Christy are today's winners today. It is Seth MacFarlane.
I recognize the voice immediately.
And I'll give Christy an extra point there. It is from the Orville. That is correct.
I knew it was because I know who you are, Daniel.
Well, I just had to pick a random one, and that's the one that...
This was not random. This is probably from a very, very, very small hat of notes.
Well...
With all the same name on it.
No, maybe so. Anyway, that was correct. That was Seth MacFarlane, and that was the Orville. So well done, guys. I want to thank you guys for coming on the show. It's hard to believe that we only have 2 more shows after this. We only have 2 more. So sad. But we're gonna make it a good one. We have a lot of fun topics to talk about next week. I am really excited.
Fun.
Oh yeah, they're fun. Trust me, they're fun. And you know what? You never know who will show up in these last couple shows. So you never know who will show up. But definitely tune in next week because we're gonna have a great show. And then after that will be our year-end review, like we always do at the end of every semester. So guys, thank you again for coming on the show. I definitely learned some stuff about Alfred Hitchcock I didn't know. I hope you guys did as well. And we will see you guys next week on As the Reel Turns. I'm gonna get our end song here. Before we have the end song, real quick, Christy, any final thoughts about Alfred Hitchcock?
Well, he's definitely one of the greatest, one of the greatest directors of all time, and it is a damn shame that he never got an Oscar nomination. He got honorary ones, but I don't count those. I only count the competitive ones.
Well, he got Oscar nominated. He just never won a competitive
Yes, that is true. That is true. He never won a competitive one, but great director and great movies. Not all of them were great, but almost all of them are something to remember.
Fair enough. Dylan, any final quick thoughts?
Great director, had some great movies, influential, timeless, will stand. Glad that they've been preserved in the Library of Congress. And, you want a suspense movie? You want a thriller movie? Him.
John, any final quick thoughts?
I just want to give a special mention to costume designer Edith Head, who Hitchcock basically begged to leave her old job and come to Paramount so she could basically costume his movies for the rest of her life. So, yeah, shout out to Edith Head. She did all of the classic costuming for, Grace Kelly and everything. Basically, every major Hitchcock movie she did the costumes for, and I think all the movies are way better for it.
Fair enough. I just want to quickly say Hitchcock did actually he did absolutely live a legend. That's why they even made a movie about him starring Anthony Hopkins. And if you still want to see the Bates house and motel, you can still go to Universal Studios when it finally reopens, and you can go see those. So, guys, thank you so much for joining us. My name is Dana Soletti. Hitchcock would be proud. This has been As the Reel Turns.
And that's all, folks.